Hey, all, welcome back to Right at the Wire. Today we're going to be looking at the Derby Pick 5. It's all stakes, and it ends with the Run for the Roses, so let's take a look at the races. The first leg of the Derby Pick 5 is the Pat Day Mile, a Grade 2 8th race at Churchill Downs. It's running a mile for a 3-year-old, and we look at the configuration and note that it's one turn and it starts in a chute, so horses to the inside have to hustle, otherwise they run the risk of getting pushed back. Number 1 is Kangaroo Court. This one's more of a sprinter. Will be stretching out for the first time. Has shown a lot of early speed. And they've only been running against state bred out in California, which is a bit of a concern. So this is a little bit of a stakes hike. That last race I watched, it looked like maybe this one would have it be a little pause before you want this one at a mile. Didn't really show that drive through to the finish, and looked like was all that he could do to get it. So I'm just not sure that this one really wants a mile, but should be a pace factor for certain. Tall Boy is an interesting one because he's been out in Dubai. Ran in the UAE Derby, the celebrated one with Derma Sotogake, and was no factor there. But he did win the 2,000 guineas at a mile. So so he's experienced at the distance. We look at his U.S. form. It was mostly out in California, all of it really. And he was getting kind of moderate success. I mean, it looked like he was improving a little bit, but not terribly much. So I don't really know what to make of this one. Seeing as how it's the first race back from Dubai, I prefer to wait, and I'm not going to use. Logan Knight we saw earlier in New York, running in the Jerome and the Gotham, and in the Gotham in particular, just probably had to check pretty hard, as I recall, and didn't really like the mud, so it was a disappointing non-factor. The Lafayette expected him to run a little better, and he really didn't show up in that race too much at all, and was another non-factor. So going back to one turn for a mile is probably a good thing, I suppose. But the last two steps up in class really haven't boded very well for this one. So I really wonder about the class, and I don't think I'm going to use. Doesn't look like this one's improving. Midnight Rising is coming off a really short turn back. It was raced on the 28th on the turf at a mile, and I don't know that. There's no real precedent for Jordan Blair to be great at wheeling horses back on short rest. Didn't do bad on turf and closed fairly nicely, and looks like has a late running style that might be pretty good in this spot. So at a price, if you think about it, maybe want to use this one under, but I'm thinking more exotics than anything else. Echo again. Was what really turned into a disappointment. Early on, looked like a world beater, particularly winning the maiden at Saratoga, and then fell back in the Iroquois. So 2 turns was no good. They tried a couple more times in the LeCompte and the Springboard Mile, and it just 2 turns just doesn't agree with this one. So you have to like that they're moving back to 1 turn. The last effort at Oaklawn was encouraging. They showed a new feature in having this one rate, and it seemed to be the right move. So maybe coming off a little off the pace will be a better scenario for this one. Certainly has the turn of foot, and 1 turn I think is more to the liking of this one. Only thing I don't like is the work tab. It seems a little short to me. So I'm not so sure this one's going to be tuned up all the way, but 1 turn is definitely more preferable. Frosted Departure is Frosted is kind of becoming one of my favorite sires because every time I watch a get from Frosted, they always fight. They may not win, but they always stay in it and they always try hard. And you got to like that. This one, the first encounter we had was in the Southwest Stakes, and really surprised me at how well this one was able to hang in against Arabian Night. Obviously didn't win, but outran what I thought was short for her pedigree, his pedigree rather. Now going back to 1 turn has got to help this one, and you get a freshening. I wouldn't be surprised if this one outruns his odds. So I think at the 20 to 1 at a price with a really sharp tab, I think this one's a logical use. And you know what? In this field, could even be a win candidate. Fort Bragg is a head case, as we know, being by a Tappet. Really hasn't done much in the last couple of starts to dissuade us from that feeling. Certainly has talent. We know this, and has speed. Know that too. The question is he going to put it all together? The Florida Derby was the last start, and he did have a lousy post, but went right to the engine with intent and just didn't follow through with it. So maybe, again, this is another one. A mile might be a better trip for this one. You got Joel Rosario, pretty hot jockey. I consider almost any odds on Fort Bragg to be an underlay just because of the unpredictability of this one. Maybe you use because of the talent, and on one turn, maybe this one can focus a little bit better. But it's just a horse I'm never really that high on, but maybe you have to use because of the talent. Bourbon Bash is one that's been a cut below. Particularly in the last few races. I mean, just always seems to do the same thing, gets up to the top of the turn, looks poised and ready to pounce, and then tires and falls back. So at one turn, it's obviously a better spot for him, but I wonder about the class level. This one just doesn't seem to be able to get over the hump. He's factored in a lot of races. Maybe this will be a little different. I don't know. I tend to like others better. But you got Flavian Pratt aboard, and the last time he was on this horse, they won by 8 lengths at Saratoga. So maybe he's got the magic touch. Just not overly certain, and I leave it up to you. The 12-1's not a bad price, but I would consider this one to be more bottom. Jim, I really like this horse. The Swale was a great race. I had to really push Super Chow to the limit, who's a really good sprinter. And at 7 furlongs, it's not too far away from this trip. So I have to believe that with a freshening, that this one's going to be firing and ready to go. One of the things I really like to see in a tab is when you see those 4 furlong works, each one is a little faster than the last. And that tells me this horse is getting sharpened and really up and ready for this one. So I really like this horse. Sean McGahee is 31%, 63% in the money with 3-year-old routes, with a 61 to 180-day layoff. So you got to think this one's going to be ready to roll, and I really like this one's chances. Definite use. Curly Jack just doesn't seem to be class-wise to shape up. Maybe going back to one turn is a better bet for this one. The last time was at Ellis Park in the Juvenile at 7 furlongs and ran a pretty good race, and Top Recruit was no slouch, so that wasn't a bad effort. I still worry that this one's just not classy enough, just doesn't really fit, and might have to work overly hard to stay in it with this group. So I don't know, maybe, and 12-1 is a decent price to find out, I guess. But I would think this one would be more underneath. Gilmore is one I don't like at all. This horse was been a disappointment at Northern California, was a disappointment at Turfway, and it was a disappointment at Aqueduct. I mean, I think the writing's on the wall with this one. He's just not a very good horse, so I would not use. Gun Pilot is in the 12 hole, but it's not going to matter a whole lot at one turn. The last time I saw this one was in the Rebel Stakes and just didn't like the mud and just didn't factor in this race. At the time, I think they had been rushing this one's training to get on the Derby trail, and we had noted that. And I think maybe it got the better of him. They gave him a little time off. He ran in the hot springs and didn't run bad. Iron Clover, we saw it back in the Gotham. We knew it was going to be pretty close to winning his stakes and did. So that's no slouch. That's a pretty good horse he was running against. So I like Gun Pilot in this case. Churchill Downs has got a positive record, and I think the 1-turn mile should be very much up this one's alley, and I would expect to move forward for this race. So I'm using Gun Pilot. Damons Mom was all the rage early on at 2. Won the Saratoga Special, and that was a pretty darn good race, but then crash. Everything's gone wrong since. The Iroquois was a real dud. Gave this one a lot of time off. Brought back on turf last month in the Palisades, and really wasn't any bit of a factor at all. So maybe he needed a race. We could say that. Michelle Lovell's pretty good with second off the layoff, so that's a positive. but not with Sprint to Root, adding to the confusion with this one. I could definitely see putting this one in the mix at 20-1. You don't know what you're going to get, but this one does have some back class, and I'll leave it up to you. But maybe it's worth a shot if you're so inclined. Freezing Point, I think, is very intriguing, and I see open morning line 50-1. I really get excited. Another get by Frosted, and this one ran a nice race in the Lafayette and got third behind the duel of Corona Bolt and Ajazi, and it did that at 66-1. No reason this one can't move forward from that. If you notice, that was a one-turn race. It was a career high buyer for this one, and it's coming in third off the layoff. I think there's a lot of good reasons to like this one. Maybe not to win it, but certainly underneath. So why not at 50-1? Second leg of the Derby Pick 5 is the ninth race at Churchill Downs, and it's the Grade 2 American Turf Stakes. It's run on the turf at a mile and 1/16 for 3-year-olds. Number 1 is Major Dude. He's been a prominent force on the 3-year-old turf scene. He's had steady improvement. The Kitten's Joy was a really nice effort, getting revenge on Candidate. The Jeff Ruby Stakes was a bit of a departure. I don't know why they suddenly made it a shift to try to get into the Derby, but ran a good race, and which is no surprise on synthetic for a horse that likes turf. So I think the improvement is continuing, and I would fully expect this one to run a good race, and I think we should absolutely use being up near the pace might be a pretty good spot. I don't know how many stalkers there really are in this race, but there is pace to run to. Might be able to get the first jump on the rest of the field. Far Bridge is another Todd Pletcher trainee, and this one has a really nice late kick. The last race in particular, I really liked what I saw here. You see in the maiden race, this one beat Carl Spackler. Granted, it was by a head, and Carl Spack was very well thought of and is in this field today. But I really like this one's late kick. I think this is a comer, and I would absolutely use in this spot. Mendelssohn's March is kind of interesting. The Bluegrass Stakes didn't really factor, although trying to be prominent early, kind of faded a little bit late. But what you do see is another improved performance, and that's 3 in a row. So this one is trending upward, going back to a surface that he clearly likes, and broke his maiden on it, albeit by disqualification. So I think maybe another step forward is in the offing here, and at 12-1, I think you're getting some pretty good value. This one you might want to consider using. Talk of the Nation. I really like this horse. Won the Columbia at Tampa with a really nice kick, and just really like the way this horse moved across the turf. I think this one has a really nice future. You see a steady improvement. Has one of the higher buyer numbers from their last race. And I think if you're going to, at 10-1, I think this one is an absolute use. And I think this one's a win candidate. Johannes is trained by Tim Yachtine and was running out west. The last effort in the Pasadena got a 92 buyer, but I don't know how impressed I was. I just didn't, there was just something about the way this horse finished that didn't get me real excited. It didn't have that sparkle in the finish. I can't put it any other way. If you go watch it, maybe you'll see what I did. But nonetheless, I think this is a big class hike from an ungraded stakes in California on the turf. So we'll see. At 15-1, you get a decent price, but I think there's other early speed in here. So I don't think it's going to be an easy task for this one, particularly with the competition level. Behind enemy lines, the Cutler Bay last time, the big issue for me with that race was the way this horse finished. Jose Ortiz geared this one down before the finish line, and but it was the way the horse geared down. It was kind of quick, just like, oh, I can't wait to stop running. So I wonder about the distance a little bit. And you see, this horse has mostly been running in sprints, and the last was his first 2-turn effort. So perhaps the distance is a question. Really, the other issue is the class hike. This is a pretty light buyer. You're coming in. I don't know how competitive this horse is in this race. Probably is going to be more of a pace factor only, and I don't really like this one. I just can't get past that the way this horse closed in the last race. Desert Duke, this would be a miracle. This is a really big class hike. You see the buyers are a little light. Has been some improvement, but I would expect they'll send this one and try to hang on. I think this is a really big class hike for this one, and I think would likely be a pace factor only. Others appeal a lot more. Mustache. This horse I've always liked since going back to the Indian Summer at Keeneland, right before the Breeders' Cup. This one ran a really big race and didn't do bad in the Breeders' Cup either, if you consider Silver Knot and Victoria Road are two pretty damn good horses. So this one acquitted themselves very well. Came out in the Columbia this year and lost to Talk of the Nation. And this one went on to win the Transylvania, a graded stakes race, which flatters, to me, Talk of the Nation more than it endorses Mustache. And I think this one's a pretty good horse still. I just kind of like others better in this spot. I think there's other pace in this race, so it's going to make it difficult for this one to get away on the front end. And really tactically, I think this one's at some disadvantage. So I like others better in this spot. Anglophile, as I noted in the Cutler Bay, was finished second and closed with a really solid kick at the end. At 50-1, I would think this one would be a really good target for your try and your superfecta. Granted, the buyers are light, but that was first off the layoff, and this one was hitting his career high, significantly higher than he'd run before. So maybe it's worth taking a chance with this one underneath. I don't think this is a win candidate, but at 50-1, why not put on your tickets for the price? Togo, by all accounts, is trading very well. From what I've heard, is a little light in the buyer department, and Kelsey Danner's a nice trainer, and second off the layoff isn't a bad angle, but it's I think this would be a major class test. This would be a big ask to win this race, given the other competitors in this race, and I think if you do like this one, because he'll be up near the lead, but underneath, I think, is probably a better bet if you like this one. I don't really see it, but if you want to throw a shot in at 30-1, I wouldn't talk you out of it, but I just don't see it. I think there's others appeal more. Carl Spackler, we mentioned before, it's a Chad Brown trainee. This one's received a lot of hype, and you can see why. The maiden race at Gulfstream, won by 8 3/4, basically won for fun, and the race prior lost by just a head to Far Bridge, who's also in this race, and we mentioned. So this one's got some hops and some. I think if you consider that this one's coming into this race fresh, which is usually a really good angle for Chad Brown, I think you'd have to consider this one a win candidate. The big problem is the post, and we will note that this horse was going to run. I believe it was in the Challenger or maybe the Transylvania. I can't remember which, but this horse was going to run in a stakes race and had the 11 hole in a 12 horse field and scratched out of the race. Now, I don't know why that was, but it was so I wonder about that, and I wouldn't be surprised if Chad scratches this one again, given the outside post. I know he wasn't happy about it for that prior race. So if this one stays in the race, then I think you have to use, but I think there's a bit of a challenge coming from the 11 hole with other pace to the inside. So it's going to be difficult for this one to get into position. Number 12 is Fantastic again. This one runs from the front end. That's what he does. You see, he hasn't been on turf for quite some time, and that one effort was a debut at Belmont at 6 furlongs, and it really didn't work out very well. I am going to assume that this one has found his sea legs and will be better on this time. However, I will say this. Wesley Ward isn't the greatest with roots, and it's not really his thing. Sprints are more what he does. But I think this one will be a pace presence. Would need a couple of breaks to get to the lead, and then it would just be a question of whether he's good enough or not. At 12-1, it's a halfway decent price. But I just think, given the fact that there's other speed to the inside, I think this one's going to be really up against it. It's just tactically, it's a very difficult place for this one to be. And the winner is, I really haven't been very excited about this horse, and I think he's plateaued. You can see the buyers really aren't moving very well. The Transylvania was just a non-factor event, and I think this one looks a little outclassed here, and I wouldn't consider using. Webslinger, last time was a disappointment to me. I thought the race set up pretty well with the early speed, but nobody could get to Mustache, and this one closed okay. Had a little bit of traffic, so we can give a pass a little bit. But the bottom line is this horse isn't winning lately, and it seems like there's other closers in here I think have a little more pluck. And so I'm kind of down on this one. At 20-1, I think under is your better bet. I don't see this one being good enough to beat some of the other more talented horses in this race. And you're also eligibles are Wadsworth and Scooby Quando. Scooby Quando is a real hard trier. Pedigree seems more suited to synthetic than turf, but I wouldn't be surprised if this one puts in a decent effort. Maybe a cut below the rest of them, though. Wadsworth is, I think he's just sort of stuck. You see 382s in a row. I don't see this one progressing. Maybe turf will shake him up. But if either one of these draw in, I consider them to be fringe players in this race. We've got others that appeal a lot more. The third leg of the Derby Pick 5 is the 10th at Churchill, and it's the Grade 1 Churchill Down Stakes. It's a dirt race run at 7 furlongs for 4-year-olds and up. Number 1 is White Abario. The first thing, of course, that comes to mind is this one's outside of Florida. Now, he did have a decent cigar mile at Aqueduct, so he can carry himself okay outside of Gulfstream, but that seems to be the best place for him to run. In particular, the last race, you'll note that he dropped in class significantly in the 7 furlong run at Gulfstream and did record his career high buyer, but he had to drop in class to do it. And a one-turn race is probably better for him. 7 furlongs is a pretty good distance, but that really bothers me, the fact that he had to drop in class to achieve that number. So I don't really like him in this spot, and I'm going to look elsewhere. CZ Rocket is your venerable old runner. He's been around a long time. Really, the thing with him is I would actually kind of like him in this spot if it wasn't for the fact he was coming from Dubai. Now, I draw a line through any performance that's done over there, regardless good or bad, because it's Dubai. But it does take a while for these horses to, when they get back, to reacclimate themselves. And this one's coming back on fairly short notice. Now, you could say that Peter Miller has a lot of faith in this one, being at 9 years old, and that he's ready to roll, and maybe so. But and he is a horse for the course at Churchill. I mean, he's done very well here, but I don't see him to be there's a lot of other late runners in this race, and I would see him to be more underneath, if anything, and I'm not sure I really like him in this spot. Hear My Song just came off of a career best effort in the Commonwealth. Really came late, and it was kind of a similar race to this one, and just kind of got up, held off Hoist to Goal and Get Her Number, who are both in here today. The one thing I would say is the all-weather to dirt angle is gone, and, as we've mentioned before, that usually means a pop in a horse's run. So, and I think maybe that's what happened last time. I know that's what was appealing to me about this horse in that race. So you don't have that here. And I don't know. Then I think that brings this one maybe back down to earth a little bit. And I think others appeal more. 30-1 is decent value, and this one is in good form. So maybe underneath is a better bet. Hoist to Gold doesn't have a lot of competitors on the front end in this race, and I think that might be to his advantage. The problem with this one is he never seems to close the deal. He's always the bridesmaid. And the last time he ran in the Commonwealth, and he ran what I thought was probably his best race I've seen him run, and yet he could only manage second. So that's not that's not terribly encouraging. If Codys Wish does not come well off the bench, then this would be his best chance to win a stakes race, in my opinion. So I would use, but I likely think he's underneath. I don't think he's going to be a match for Codys Wish. Get Her Number is another late runner, and this race is replete with late runners. And one thing you can always say is that when you have a lot of closers, it usually doesn't bode well, because then there's a lot of traffic in the back, and usually closers do better when they're on their own or maybe have one other rival. So it's an interesting race from that perspective. Forget Her Number, he didn't do too terribly bad in the last race, but as seems to have was in better form earlier and late in 2022, and when he ran a really nice race in the Cigar Mile, kind of unexpectedly. Since then, the Pegasus, that was too far for that horse. He could draw a line through it. But the last couple efforts have been okay, and I'm not so sure necessarily this one's cranked up for a really big one here. And I think would require his career best effort, and I don't think that he's good enough. Tejano Twist is another closer, and this one ran a really smart race in the Whitmore and was able to get up and pull away. It's a little tougher waters here, I think, and the problem with this one is being a late runner has a lot to do late, and sometimes this one gives himself too much to do late. Still, the form is pretty good, and I would consider this one to be more of an underused than a win candidate. I think there's others, particularly the one next to him, that are much more viable in that regard. Codys Wish, what can you say? The Breeders' Cup Dirt Mile, phenomenal effort. This is a distance this one should relish. It's one turn. Coming off a layoff, Breeders' Cup, horses coming out of the Breeders' Cup, coming off a layoff, sometimes don't fire terribly well. But Bill Mott's an awesome trainer, and this one is 4 for 4 at Churchill Down. So I have to believe that any thought that there might be a regression of some kind will be couched by that. So I like this horse in this spot. I don't see anybody even close to being competitive to this horse. I think it's a logical single in the pick 5, and I think what more need be said? This one's awesome, and it's a great story too. And I think Cody's actually going to be at Churchill Downs, so it's a feel-good story too. Fortney Hill, I think, is in really good form right now, coming off a nice effort at Keeneland. It's logical that this one would take another step forward. I don't think it's good enough necessarily to win, but at 20 to 1, I think you're getting a nice price, and I would consider using this one underneath for sure. And if you want to be bold, maybe as a win candidate as well at a price, because if you're going to beat Codys Wish, you might as well do it with value. So Alfred James, the last race was pretty lousy, and I just don't think this one really stacks up with the veteran here. And this is another one that kind of runs from off the pace, and we're just chock full of them in this race, and there's others that appeal a lot more, so no thank you. Endorsed is a horse that's been a really nice story, finally breaking through with a win in the optional claimer, and then 2 gradeds in a row. So this one was in really good form prior to the layoff. The only thing I have to say is I worry a little bit about 7-year-olds when they come off career efforts and then go to the bench. And it's just it takes a little while sometimes for them to get back into form. Endorsed has run well off the bench before, so it doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to have a subpar effort here. I just got a feeling, particularly out in the 10 hole, that he's going to be a little up against it, and I kind of want to wait one. But it wouldn't surprise me if he runs a good race, and he's probably the only horse who has a realistic chance to beat Codys Wish in this spot. But I think I don't think he's coming into it in the best of circumstances. So little tepid use. I think if you want to spread in this race, this is one you have to include. But I think under is more likely, and I think Codys Wish is still the best bet. Steel Sunshine has been one that, we sort of, one that kind of wets your whistle a little bit, gets you a little bit excited as an overlay, has had some pretty good efforts. But the Gulfstream Park Mile, we really thinking was going to do something and didn't really factor very much at all. Came back in the Sir Shackleton at Gulfstream at 7 furlongs and didn't do badly. So third off the layoff, maybe this is one you want to think about, and you do get it Rod Ortiz. So couldn't be coming in really a better spot for this one at 4 years old, coming off the career high. But again, another late runner, and we're chock full of them here. So I wonder about that. This one has tried to run up near the pace before. Maybe we'll have to try again. Rod Ortiz is a crafty jockey, so I'm sure he'll get this one in the right position. But it's just another one I think who's playing for second. The fourth leg of the Derby Pick 5 is the 11th at Churchill Downs, and it's the Grade 1 Turf Classic. It's run at 1 1/8 on the turf for 4-year-olds and up, and we want to take note that this is a brand new Churchill Downs turf course, so we'll see who likes it and who doesn't. Number 1 is Ocean Atlantique. His last effort was pretty subpar after some pretty decent ones on synthetic. And this would be a bit of a class test here, I think, with some of the other more prominent ones in here. So I think this one probably would be a pace factor. I don't know that you'll get much more out of this one, but at 20-1, if you like them, you maybe can use them. But I think this one's in a little deep. Masterpiece seems to be regressing to me. This one, we kept waiting for that big performance, and it just never seems to get there. After a couple of 97s in a row, threw in a 92, and I think this one may be on the downside. Just really, I can't count on this one to be any more than under, because that's all he seems to do. So that's all I'm going to consider him for here. Wolfie's Down and Ghost ran a pretty awesome race in the Kentucky Cup Classic last time, and if you watch it, he really had plenty in the tank to finish it off and was much the best. Interestingly enough, Verstappen, who finished second in that, came back to win the Elkhorn at Keeneland at 16-1. So that validates this one's performance. There is other pace in the race, however, and I think it's probably going to be difficult to wire this field. So I would consider this one to be more a pace factor than anything else. But at 10-1, that's a fairly decent price. I would consider this one more seriously if Jonathan Thomas wasn't, his barn's just dead. At Keeneland, they just didn't do anything. And so that kind of compromises the possibility that this one runs another good race. So that's really more than any other reason that I'm against this one. Steady On has been just that, incrementally steady improvement. This would be a class test, though, because most of the other efforts have been against lesser, but has been getting better each time, and, was a pretty good bet to stay in the money. It's been there in 6 out of 8 tries. This is a little further than the mile he ran at last time. And I think it looks to be the first going 1 1/8. So we'll see how he does with the added distance. You lose Irad. He's gone up to the mark right next door. But you get Jose. So one Ortiz is just as good as the other, I guess. If this one's worth considering, I think, at 5-1. I just think there might be a couple others I think have a little more upside. Up to the Mark is one of them. It's another Todd Pletcher with Rod Ortiz, Mike Rapoli stables. Great connections. This one's been getting steadily better. And that Maker's Mark mile was a really nice effort, finishing third and damn near beat Modern Games for second. So I think this one is on the upturn, and all systems are go. I think a mile and an eighth is probably going to be a better distance. And I think this is a little softer group than she faced in the Maker's Mark. He faced in the Maker's Mark mile. So 4-1, I think, is a pretty square price. I doubt it'll stay there. This one's likely to be the favorite, but I think deserving as such, and I would definitely use. Earls Rock is coming from Phil D'Amato's barn, and Phil D'Amato did really well at Keeneland, shipping his horses from the West. Got Luis Saez aboard, and he's red hot at Churchill Downs right now. This one seems a little a cut below. Those California turf horses, I do have a bias against them. Generally, they don't ship very well. I think the fact that D'Amato's a great turf trainer, and the majority of his races are run on it. They appear to be outperforming our expectations lately, so maybe you can upgrade this one a little bit. Being off the pace might not be such a bad thing with all the early pace, and might be able to get first jump, but I like others better. I think this one's just a cut below some of the betters in this race. Hong Kong Harry is probably, of the Phil D'Amato pair, this is the one I'd be looking at more seriously. You get Flavian Pratt aboard, and I think that's a good sign, considering he was riding Earls Rock for the last couple and moves to Hong Kong Harry. So I think that's this one's probably a better candidate. You could see this is a graded stakes winner, grade 2s and a grade 3. The Kilroe Mile, I have to believe that distance was just a little short. For this one, I think a mile and an eighth is more up the alley. And coming off a layoff, I think this one will be fresh and ready to roll. And, like I say, given the way Phil D'Amato's barn is rolling, then I think maybe you want to consider this one. Don't like the price so much, but I think this is a valid win candidate. Centene is... another one coming from a hot barn. You see Brendan Walsh has won 3 out of 4 at Churchill. He was killing it at Keeneland, and Tyler Gaffley owns his A rider. But this one presents a bit of a dilemma because the old Churchill Downs turf course, this one won the Arlington Million. And but that was when he was rolling and he was really running well. The last 3 efforts have not been particularly good. Particularly his last effort, that Kentucky Cup Classic with Wolfie's Dynaghost and Verstappen. This one didn't do well right off the bat, and just never recovered from it. Got up for 4th, but was pretty much a non-factor. It may have needed a race from the freshening. That's true. So perhaps we can expect better here. And the barn is on all cylinders right now. So, but if you look, but prior to that, the couple efforts weren't very good. And you just wonder if this one had sort of peaked. I'm willing to give this one another shot, though, and I think because of the barn is doing so well, you have to take this one seriously. But you do have to know this is a new turf course, so maybe the horse for the course angle isn't quite as strong. We'll see. Spooky Channel's the old veteran who just keeps doing it. Won the Muniz Memorial last time. Wasn't the greatest of fields, and we know that Fairgrounds turf course was nothing to write home about. So this one, the way I look at it is, after the 3rd straight start and hitting a career high buyer for the year, that this one's kind of due for a regression. I think maybe it's starting a new form cycle. Seems to go in 3s. So I'm kind of thinking this one's ready for a downturn, and that's really my biggest thing against this one. If he runs his normal race, that puts him right in the mix, and he likely would be a little bit off the pace, and that probably would be a good thing because there is a lot of early pace, and he would get first jump. I just have a feeling he's ready for a regression, so I wouldn't use. Bye-Bye Melvin is likely to be the early pace. You can see in the Breeders' Cup Turf, that's exactly what he did. And he was the lone front runner that day. He's got some competition in this race. I think he probably wants longer than a mile and an eighth, but nonetheless, I think on his best day, he's very capable of wiring the field. The problem is he's got competition for the early lead in this one, and I think that's going to hamper his chances, particularly since he's out in the 10 hole. So Grand Motion's doing pretty well. as well as the other guys who had a good meet at Keeneland. But I'm going to go elsewhere on this one. I think there's too much competition on the front end. I'm going to refer you to the deeper analysis I did for the Kentucky Derby. So I'm going to skip that for this posting, and but we'll go through it as we get down at the bottom of the ticket here. And here's what our pick 5 ticket looks like. You got to spread pretty good in this one. A lot of these races are pretty contentious. In the 8th, we're going to use 5, 9, 12, and 14. In the 9th, we're going to use 1, 2, and 4. We're going to single Codys Wish, number 7, in the 10th. In the 11th, we're going to use 5, 7, and 8. And in the Kentucky Derby, we're going to use 5, Tap It Trice, 9, Skinner, 14, Angel of Empire, 15, Forte, and 17, Derma Sodagaki. So that's 4 times 3 is 12, times 3 is 36, times 5 is 180. That's a $90 ticket at a 50-cent base. And I think it's a really tough call, but I think that gives us a lot of options to take it down. Don't be alarmed by the change of clothes. You're not seeing things. Man's got to sleep sometimes, even during Derby week. Hope our analysis helps you in forming your pick 5 ticket. I think we've given you some pretty good options. It's a pretty contentious ticket, so we've got to spread in most of the races, and we hope you can get Codys Wish home to give us some good options in the Derby itself. If you do want more coverage of the Derby race, just go to the Elements of Handicapping postings. They're a much deeper dive on all the contestants, and maybe that will help you make your own decisions as far as your pick 5 ticket or just to bet on the Kentucky Derby itself. We'll have some more coverage later this week. There's a couple more betting options I'm exploring, so be on the lookout for those. And, of course, if you do like what you see here, please like and subscribe, and we thank you for coming by. Hope to see you again real soon. I'll have more to talk to you about this week, and we're getting closer, so I know the tension's rising, but let's hang in there, and I'll talk to you soon, so be well until then.